Okay, well, first I want to say thank you everyone for joining us for this continued information series on human trafficking. We're pleased to be joined by Truckers Against Trafficking, and our vice chair will introduce the two speakers. And now it's my honor to introduce the vice chair of the National Indian Gaming Commission, Catherine Eisenclaus. Ma'am, and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Steve. Good morning and good afternoon for some of us, and welcome to the National Indian Gaming Commission's anti-human trafficking training with guests from the nonprofit organization Truckers Against Trafficking. This webinar will provide information on how tribal casinos can play a critical role in combating human trafficking. As Steve mentioned, I'm Catherine Eisenclaus. I'm Taos Pueblo, and I'm the Vice Chair of the National Indian Gaming Commission. We have a great turnout today. I believe we have over 200 participants registered, so we're really excited to see all the interest in this topic. The NIGC is pleased to be able to present this training with Truckers Against Trafficking. As I mentioned, Truckers Against Trafficking is a nonprofit organization that exists to educate, equip, empower, and mobilize members of the trucking, bus, and energy industries to combat human trafficking. Through their Busing on the Lookout program, they have developed gaming industry-specific training tools and best practices. They have tailored today's training to be specifically relevant to tribal gaming facilities. Over the last few years, the NIGC has collaborated with partners to provide free and tribal gaming specific anti-human trafficking trainings through our regional training courses and more recently through our online programs and webinars. We have sought to raise awareness of this crime and to equip tribes and tribal gaming facilities with information and resources to help address it as they see fit within their own communities. Tribal gaming facilities are situated at the intersection of governmental entities, the tribal community, law enforcement, and the public. The tribal gaming industry is uniquely situated to foster partnerships to tackle human trafficking within Indian country. The initiative that tribal gaming facilities are taking and continuing to take is something that we aim to support in our role at the NIGC. We anticipate that that initiative will build safeguards for tribal citizens and casino patrons as well as nearby communities. At the NIGC, we will continue to raise awareness and coordinate with our partners and stakeholders to continue to provide tools, information, and resources to help combat human trafficking. Truckers Against Trafficking has noted that casinos can be a refuge for victims, offering a secure place where they can seek help or attempt to exit their situation. That quote resonated with me as a call to action and illustrates the important role that we in the tribal gaming industry can play in the fight against human trafficking. Our two guest speakers today will give about a 40-minute presentation, followed by about 15 minutes for question and answers. You can submit questions at any time during the presentation in the question and answer box, which should be visible to you now, I believe. If you have any technical questions, there's also the chat box feature, which our team can help you with. I'll collect all the questions and answers and facilitate the Q&A following their presentation. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers. Our first speaker will be Annie Savcik. Annie is the director of the Busing on the Lookout program, director of Busing on the Lookout. It is a program of Truckers Against Trafficking. As Busing on the Lookout director, Annie is responsible for leading Truckers Against Trafficking's efforts to educate, equip, empower, and mobilize members of the bus industry in the United States and Canada to combat human trafficking. Annie came to Truckers Against Trafficking in 2018 with over 12 years of experience as a human rights lawyer, working on anti-human trafficking, anti-torture, and refugee protection policies at the national and international level. She's a graduate of the University of New Mexico School of Law and received her BA in International Studies from the University of Denver. Our second presenter is Liz Williamson. Liz is a training specialist for Truckers Against Trafficking and a survivor of human trafficking. Located in Northern California, Williamson handles trucking relationships for Truckers Against Trafficking in Canada and shares her trafficking story at casino and bus coalition builds and other Truckers Against Trafficking events. A survivor advocate, she has done direct service work with survivors at the local, regional, and national level. For the past decade, she has trained and spoken nationally to audiences regarding her survival of familial trafficking to help dispel the myths surrounding this topic and to empower individuals to help make a difference. Williamson has also trained medical professionals with Dignity Health to identify victims to receive medical services, with special attention given to the medical community on what was missed or unable to assist her during her trafficking experience. She's a member of the Survivor Leadership Institute through GEMS and has a bachelor's degree in English literature. She passionately believes survivors deserve the opportunity to use their experiences to rewrite their stories and their own futures. So with that, we're very much looking forward to hearing from both of these presenters, and I will turn it over to Annie to get started on the presentation.
Great, thank you so much. So good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. I happen to be based out of Denver, Colorado, so it is still morning on my clock. Thank you so much for that introduction, Catherine, and to the National Indian Gaming Commission for sponsoring this webinar session. And thanks to all of you who have taken the time to join us to learn more about how tribal casinos can help combat human trafficking. Again, my name is Annie Sobick, and I'm the director of Busing on the Lookout, which is a program of Truckers Against Trafficking, or TAT, as we call it for short. I'm going to spend a few minutes sharing with you an overview of what TAT's all about, how we work, what we're trying to achieve, and then specifically talk about our casino-related initiative and what opportunities there may be for tribal casinos to partner with us in the fight against human trafficking in the United States. I do first want to commend all of you, though. I know that there has been a lot of proactive and innovative work being done in many tribal communities and at many of your casino properties. And I want to congratulate the Navajo Nation for being awarded the 2020 Presidential Award for extraordinary efforts to combat trafficking in persons, and recognize that after years of advocacy by Indigenous women, tribes, and Native organizations on the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, which is a centuries-old tragedy dating back to colonialism and is now connected in part to sexual assault and sex trafficking, that issue may finally be getting the attention it deserves with the recent passage of the Non-Visible Act and Savannah's Act, two important pieces of legislation intended to better identify, report, and respond to cases, along with developing public education strategies, providing law enforcement training, and improving coordination in investigating related crimes. And finally, I would be remiss if I didn't at least acknowledge that it has been a really hard year, and the impacts of COVID on hospitality and entertainment has been just devastating, and many American Indian communities have been disproportionately impacted by the worst aspects of the virus and are grieving tremendous losses. And sadly, as COVID relates specifically to human trafficking, we know that economic hardship, instability, isolation, and all of these other struggles that people throughout the United States are facing hit the most vulnerable the hardest and exacerbate the factors that increase an individual's risk of falling victim to trafficking, which means that current circumstances may be deepening victims' dependencies on their traffickers, reducing options for exit and recovery, and maybe worsening the violence and abuse victims are suffering at the hands of their traffickers. All things that make our work together in this moment that much more urgent and important. So again, thank you for your participation today. So before we dive into the topic at hand, I do want to share a bit about Truckers Against Trafficking. So TAT exists, as Catherine had mentioned in her opening remarks. We exist to educate, equip, empower, and mobilize members of the trucking, energy, bus, and related industries to combat human trafficking. Our theory of change is rooted in the belief that by educating and equipping members of these industries with the tools they need to spot human trafficking and report it effectively, we can mobilize millions of people to move from passive bystanders to active disruptors. TAT's approach is to come alongside our industry and government partners, recognizing that you are the experts in your industry, you are the experts in your geographic areas, and especially in the context of tribal governments and businesses, you know your circumstances, your needs, and your challenges better than anyone. What we have to offer are turnkey industry-specific training resources, implementation guidance, sharing of best practices and lessons learned in other contexts, and recommendations of how you as industry leaders can play a proactive role in helping to reduce trafficking and in helping in the recovery of victims and prosecution of perpetrators. And so there are many overlaps between tribal casinos and the industries that TAT works with. With the bus industry and our Busing on the Lookout program that I manage, bus companies, they don't operate in isolation, as state and federal gaming laws limit casinos to certain geographic areas. Many bus companies provide services specifically to areas, whether on tribal lands or to counties where casino gaming is legal. And with the trucking industry, there are trucker-friendly casinos scattered throughout the country. Many of them are tribal casinos located in somewhat rural areas at key interstate or highway junctions and have special parking for semi-trucks, or are intentionally located next to a truck stop and market to truckers who are passing through the area. And finally, as it relates to our Energy or Empower Freedom program, we also know that certain geographic areas, there are significant overlaps between tribal lands and oil and gas drilling, as well as direct connections stemming from oil and gas drilling, where there's been an influx of transitory men in a concentrated area that increases the risk and prevalence of sex trafficking, creating danger for the women, girls, and boys in those Native communities, as well as creating a magnet for traffickers to bring their victims to those areas. And some of those regions have tribal casinos that may be seeing an uptick in trafficking activity related to the oil boom. So whether we're talking about trucking, busing, energy, or casinos, TAT believes that through coordinated approaches at a community level that involve industry stakeholders and law enforcement, state agencies, federal agencies, tribal governments, we can close loopholes to traffickers and provide pathways to freedom for victims. So just to make sure that we are all on the same page with what we mean by human trafficking, I want to share with you this general definition. So human trafficking is the exploitation of human beings through force, fraud, or coercion for the purposes of either commercial sex, so think prostitution, stripping, pornography, brothels, pimps, as well as forced labor or labor trafficking. So think domestic servitude, construction, agricultural fields. Labor trafficking can occur in hotels, motels, restaurants, casinos. This is workers not being paid for their labor, or being held against their will, or being forced to work long hours. And all of this is being driven by a trafficker, a victimizer, a person who is in control and is making a profit off of exploiting someone else's body or labor. Human trafficking is modern day slavery, and while many people would like to believe that slavery ended over 150 years ago, we know that is sadly not true. In fact, there are over 40 million victims of modern day slavery worldwide, including thousands of girls, boys, women, and men here in the United States. It is the second largest criminal activity in the world, generating an estimated $150 billion in illicit profits globally. And as traffickers prey upon vulnerabilities, they frequently target children using their hopes, dreams, fears, disappointments, immaturities as weapons to exploit their bodies for profit. And while anyone can be susceptible to the forceful and manipulative methods that traffickers use, children who are in foster care or young adults who have recently aged out of foster care, the homeless, runaways, LGBTQ, and people who come from abusive homes are particularly at risk. And the vulnerabilities that traffickers prey upon are exacerbated by poverty, racial discrimination, migration status, fear of law enforcement, all factors that contribute to this crime disproportionately victimizing people who are Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. And there are some unique factors among American Indian and Alaska Native communities in this country that enhance vulnerabilities to trafficking, such as those connected to poverty, the long-term effects of multi-generational trauma, and complex jurisdictional challenges that often make it difficult to investigate and prosecute crimes committed on tribal lands, particularly when the perpetrator is a non-Indian. And when you combine this with lack of social services, limited reliable transit options, and in some places, large influxes of men from outside a community who are descending upon a place because of oil and gas drilling or sports events or entertainment attractions like casinos and the concerts, conferences, and other events they host, you sadly have a perfect storm for opportunistic traffickers to exploit, because you have to remember that at the end of the day, traffickers take their victims wherever they can make money, and they are counting on the rest of us to not pay attention, to not know what to do, or to write off a person being sold as just a prostitute. TAT's goal and what we are striving to accomplish through engagement with target industries is to prove traffickers wrong. So with that, and to talk more about the tactics that traffickers use and the direct connections between trafficking and casinos, I am now going to turn it over to my colleague, TAT training specialist and survivor leader, Liz Williamson.
Thank you so much, Annie, and I am so grateful that the Commission has us here today. I hope that this is an informative presentation that challenges you to what can you do to help a survivor. For the tactics of the trafficker, you know, I really think that our biggest question here is, well, how do they do it? And why do these victims listen? What is it about them? Well, unfortunately, force, fraud, and coercion do exist, and unless the victim is under 18, usually you have to be able to prove that this happened for it to be a trafficking case. Force can look like physical violence. Even if they're hit once, that threat remains real to the victim. They know that that force means I have to do whatever they're telling me to do for fear of my life. Fraud could look like a job offer. A very skilled businessman is connected into the music industry and says, I can introduce you to who you need to do, who you need to meet in order for your dreams to come true. He's latching onto that vulnerability and to that dream that she has in her life. Fraud could also look like a switch and bait system where they think they're going into one type of job or one type of situation that they would be able to handle. And when they get there, they realize that the exact opposite has happened and they have no options or resources. Coercion may be the most difficult tactic to understand if we have not personally experienced violence or abuse in our lives, but coercion, I believe, is actually the most difficult one because it's the mental chains that happen in your mind that suddenly he says, well, I did all of this for you, now you owe me. That power imbalance is truly what the traffickers feed on to keep someone in line and in control. Who are these traffickers? They could even be a family member. For me, in my story, my first trafficker was my mother. My mom had a job that was respectable. She was a nurse. I hope by sharing that, it starts to change your perception of who are these people. They're not cloaked in black figure. Instead, they're normal human beings that we may have interactions with, and we need to know what to look for. Annie, if you wouldn't mind switching to the next slide. Trafficking casinos and trafficking in the United States. This relationship could be between an older male and a younger female with that power imbalance of money and power. It could also look like an employer at a strip club. You wouldn't think that trafficking could potentially happen there, but that exploitation of vulnerability can definitely happen there. It could also look like a trusted authority figure, those in foster care, where you have nothing and you're willing to do whatever it takes just to have a place to sleep and just to have something to eat. With all of this said and done, trafficking at a casino, while it does happen, casinos can also be a place of refuge for a victim. I never want to paint it in the light of anything but that. That is the power that we have in the casino industry, is to truly challenge the perception of how do we change this and allow these victims to get the help and the services that they need. Many victims, when they're in the casino, they're under pressure to earn as much money as they can because the threats of violence are real from that trafficker, and what he or she would do if they did not make that certain amount of money, we don't even want to dream or imagine it. A person who's been trafficked are incredibly observant of their surroundings. They may walk in and around the casino just to know the exits, just to know the floor plans. When I was trafficked and looking for a way out or an escape, just in case something happened, because I think the scariest vulnerability of all is to walk into a room with a stranger and trust that you're going to be able to walk back out. That said, a casino is a place where strangers can meet, seemingly under innocent circumstances, where perhaps a gentleman wanted a date for the evening and he doesn't know anyone, so he sets up a date online and a young female may come join him. It could also be my story, where I did go to casinos that were family friendly. My mom and a family friend, they would drag in things that made me look like I was in a little girl's pageant. Instead of having staff that would interact with me, they interacted with the adults as was appropriate. But here I was, a little girl with a secret too big to bear. At those casinos, I had opportunities to interact with staff. I had interactions with the maids. I had interaction on the gaming floor, all wishing that someone could look me in the eye, because I wasn't allowed to look you in the eye. That was one of my rules. But if someone had engaged me in that way, perhaps you would have seen the secret that was too big for me to bear. Growing up like that, I thought it was normal, that over-sexualization of my life. I learned inappropriate behaviors of how to interact with, particularly with men. And when it came to that, truly there wasn't a language around human trafficking and what someone was looked at. Perhaps someone would have looked at me and said that I was promiscuous. I'd like to challenge that stereotype. Instead of promiscuous, I learned that behavior from the traffickers that I was around. I came to a hotel with camera equipment. There was things that may not look obvious where you have a giant checklist, but there was enough things to where you'd say, what's really going on here? Is she really here for a family vacation, or is she here for something more? I came to the hotel and I had to listen to my authority figure. Even when I ran away from her room, they put me back into the room because, again, I should be able to trust the adults I'm with, right? There were missed opportunities to see me as a human being, to see me as someone in need of services and help. There was a missed opportunity just to treat me like I matter. I think that's the biggest thing that any survivor would ask, is to treat us like we matter. When it came down to it, when I would go up and down elevators with different groups of men, I'd like for you to think about that scenario, whether I'm 7 or I'm 12 or I'm 16 and dolled up and made to look older than I was. Did I really fit in? Was that really appropriate? Or was there something more that someone could have done? Now, I really do think that people should have seen the paraphernalia in our room. They could have heard the loud noises, or even how many sheets and towels we had to constantly switch out. But the hope of a presentation like this today is that instead you're going to take the red flags that Annie will continue to share, use my story as an opportunity to change a life.
Thank you so much, Liz. So I'm just going to review some of the potential indicators of human trafficking specific to casinos, and several of them Liz alluded to, but figure it's kind of helpful just to have a list that we can run through. You know, generally speaking, red flags of trafficking fall into 4 different categories. These could be signs of control, vulnerability, recruitment, or any indication that the person is involved in commercial sex, particularly if that person appears to be a minor. Now, please note that identifying a person who is being exploited is not a simple matter. Use your instincts, power of observation, and when possible, a few well-placed questions that Liz is going to talk about a little bit in a minute to help determine if you are looking at a potential human trafficking situation. Now, keep in mind that multiple indicators will most likely present themselves if this crime is occurring. So specifically in the casino context, employees should be on the lookout for red flags such as restricted or controlled communication, someone who's not allowed to speak for themselves or doesn't make eye contact or seems fearful or uncomfortable with the person that they're with. Look for signs of bruising or branding or other types of physical trauma. Pay attention to individuals who are on the casino floor, who are kind of walking around the perimeter as if scoping out security or looking for buyers. Take note of people, likely would be a young woman, but could be a boy as well, who are approaching men who seem to be drunk or winning big at the gaming tables, but that they don't seem to know. Some opening lines they might use would be, lucky night or looking to party. And, they're not likely at that time going to be talking about any commercial sexual exchange or money, but they may talk about lap dances or strip teases. Pay attention. Again, this is relevant in the context of casino or gaming towns that are located in kind of more rural communities where there might be there are specific destinations, but pay attention to kind of young people who are visiting these towns or visiting these areas but aren't traveling for any age appropriate activities. Pay attention to anyone who's under 21 and trying to hang out on the casino floor. Any acknowledgement from someone that they have a pimp or that they're needing to make a quota. And again, anyone offering to exchange sex for money or any other good or service could be a victim of trafficking, especially if he or she is a minor or is being directed or controlled by someone else. So Liz, I will now turn it back to you to talk about what casino employees should do if they suspect trafficking is taking place and what it means to take a victim-centered approach.
The first thing that I would like to point out is that if you suspect immediate danger for this victim or for yourself, please call 911. There is no reason to approach the trafficker to put yourself in any more danger or that victim. Use your security resources at the casino. Really lobby together to make this a unified effort. Make sure that protocol exists and that you know what you will do when you encounter a victim. Don't treat it as, I know what I will do if I meet a victim. Chances are you've already met one. You just didn't know what you were looking at. That said, if you suspect human trafficking, please, if you have your cell phone on the casino floor, really enter in the National Human Trafficking Hotline number now when you're not in this situation, so that when you are in this situation, you can make that call that will change a life. They also have a texting option for those of us that enjoy texting or find that less obtrusive. I have to say that when they came out with that, that is a really easy way also to tell a victim, hey, if you text this number, you could get more resources. Texting is sometimes a lot easier than having a difficult conversation that we feel we may say the wrong thing. Here's the good news. Questions to ask, even if you feel like you're going to say the wrong thing, have a victim-centered approach. Treat them like you would treat your sister, your daughter, your mother, your nephew, your cousin. How would you interact with someone who may be going through something so unspeakable that they don't even have words for it, or they're so defensive and angry that they want to just push you away because they don't want anyone else to get hurt? Instead, I'd like to suggest Can I offer you a glass of water? Are you hungry? Have you eaten? Get them somewhere safe. If they're in a group of other potential victims, have them separated, particularly from the trafficker. If I had been separated from my mother, I promise you that I would have sang like a canary. Now, if you could have fed me maybe a Shirley Temple, that would have gone a long way, particularly when I was a kid, because I thought they were great drinks. That said, the victim-centered approach, it starts with questions that ensure their emotional and mental safety before you ever get to, what is the situation that I'm looking at? Because you need to get pretty sensitive information, make sure that they feel safe and comforted, comfortable, and then dive in a little bit at a time. Now, I know that as we present on different trafficking vocabulary and lingo, it may be interesting for us to be able to use it so we look like we know what we're talking about. Go with the language that makes sense to you. Are you in trouble? Do you need help? Do you feel safe with your boyfriend? Does he make you do anything that you don't want to do? How would you gently ask this of someone who may or may not be ready to tell you the truth? Because when you really look at a victim, we live under a cloud of shame by what has been done to us. We internalize that shame so much that we need somebody to tell us that we matter and that we're worthy, and that what happened to us is not our fault, because it's never a victim's fault. All of that to say, also know your local organizations. Who are the boots on the ground in your local area? Who is the Rape Crisis Center? What is their approach? Do they have someone that could come on scene and talk with victims? What can you do in your local community that ties it back to the fact that this local person may live right here and need services far past this day? Trainings like this are vital because it'll happen, and it's just a matter of time. So I hope that you take this opportunity just to realize that you now have all the information you need to save a life.
Great, thank you, Liz. And I'll also just note that we are going to be opening it up for Q&A later. I know there's some questions that are coming in through the chat box, and some of the things I think we're addressing, but others, we will be taking time to address in probably about 10 minutes. So I just want to kind of note that in light of everything that we've just talked about, in response to kind of all of these realities, TAT created a set of niche-specific turnkey training resources for casinos. Our Casinos Combating Human Trafficking materials are comprised of a 24-minute multimedia online training tool, a toolkit for casino managers, and a casino wallet card. These resources are all available for free on our website at www.truckersagainsttrafficking.org, and I can mail you the print materials on request. The online multimedia training is intended to be a primary training tool for casinos to use with their frontline staff, and it's also intended to be a supplementary tool for TAT's bus industry partners who provide casino transport services, but are also sharing the full bus industry training video with their drivers. So beyond training, casinos can also help reach victims with this life-saving information. According to data from the National Human Trafficking Hotline, the top type of caller are community members, which is kind of broadly defined. But after that, it's victims themselves who are seeking assistance. And so we worked with survivors of sex trafficking to create a series of posters that use language and visuals that are intended to be eye-catching for victims to see and know they're not alone and know that there are resources out there to help them. These posters also contribute to general public awareness about how vulnerable girls, boys, women, and men can be lured into trafficking situations. So please put up these posters in locations where victims or potential victims may see them. We will share these designs with you free of charge so you can kind of print them to your specs, or we have some of them printed out and stored in a warehouse in a kind of 11 by 17 that we can mail to you. For the past 8 years, TAT has been highly successful in creating public-private partnerships between transportation industry stakeholders, law enforcement, and state agencies through its Coalition Build program. The Coalition Build approach stimulates significant systems change by building effective partnerships that can be force multipliers in spreading awareness and combating human trafficking by coming alongside industry and simultaneously training the law enforcement who will be the first ones arriving on the scene. TAT has seen a more coordinated anti-trafficking approach in the locations where it's hosted coalition builds. Since 2012, TAT has hosted 52 coalition builds in 36 states and Canada. And in November of 2019, we partnered with the Colorado Attorney General's Office and the Colorado Gaming Association to pilot this model of engagement for the bus companies, law enforcement, and casinos operating in Black Hawk, which is a mountain gaming town about 40 miles west of Denver. The briefing was attended by 85 representatives from law enforcement, bus companies, and casinos in the area. And in a survey completed at the end of the briefing, 90% of respondents said that they felt better prepared to identify human trafficking after attending the event, and 100% said they would recommend attending a briefing like this to others in their field. In 2020 and beyond, we plan to build upon these initial outreach efforts and host additional coalition builds that bring casinos, bus companies, law enforcement, and other transportation professionals together. We'll host these in person if we can, probably more likely virtually. We do prefer in person, but we're all doing what we can given COVID-related restrictions and precautions. So before we open it up for Q&A, I just want to summarize our key recommendations. Most people, when they hear about how dark this problem is, want to do something to help, but not everyone is in a critical position to make an impact. But as leaders in the casino industry and tribal gaming from throughout the country, you are. So what can you do? First and foremost, train. Incorporate our free 24-minute casino webinar into your orientation or ongoing training for your staff, and hand out our casino-specific wallet card. We also have a toolkit that's designed for casino managers and walks you through action steps and best practices. As part of this, please be sure to adopt internal policies. Make sure that you have an anti-trafficking in persons policy with a demand reduction focus, and that you have established and communicated internal reporting policies for when trafficking is suspected on your property. Second, post victim-centered information on the National Human Trafficking Hotline in your casinos. As I noted, we have posters that we will share with you for free. Let's make sure that victims are getting this information and that they have an opportunity to learn about resources out there that could potentially help them. And finally, partner with us to host a coalition build in your area. Again, these are events that bring industry stakeholders together with law enforcement for targeted training, coordination, and relationship development. As I mentioned, we'd like to do a series of locally focused coalition builds with casinos next year, and would love to talk with any of you who may be interested in working with us on that. And so before I open it for questions and discussion, I do want to highlight that TAT's Freedom Drivers Project, which is a mobile exhibit that in normal times travels the country educating audiences about the realities of sex trafficking, is open to all of today's participants for a virtual tour. This virtual tour will be accessible through November 20th. There is a URL that you can access at www.truckersagainsttrafficking NIGC.org/casino training. It takes about 7 minutes to go through if you follow the audio, but it can also be a self-guided tour if you want to take a little bit more time or a little bit less time with it. In the follow-up email that you all will be receiving after this training, that will include links to the training materials, will also include a link to the Freedom Drivers Project virtual tour. So with that, this is my contact information. Liz and I are happy to take questions, or if people have comments or want to offer other kind of reflections or experiences or anecdotes of activities that you've been involved in, we welcome you to put that in the chat box as well. So I will turn it then to Catherine, who's going to be moderating the Q&A.
Thank you. That was an incredible presentation. I wish that you could hear from the participants. I mean, I feel like you've packed so much valuable information in such a short time. This has been so incredibly valuable. So we very much appreciate your time and all of your insight. We have a lot of great questions too, so I will get started with that. And I apologize that participants aren't able to just speak directly. We don't have that capability, so just make sure you put your questions or comments in the Q&A box. One quick one that we'll just get out of the way: will this training be available after this online? Yes, we are recording this and we will make it available, I believe, on our website. We're going to follow up with all participants with links to the materials that were mentioned, the other casino training that you talked about, and the posters and everything. We will get that out to everyone following this. All right, so first question: what are the acknowledged nonverbal methods that a person in peril can or might use to communicate to others without letting their handler know? So
Liz, do you want to take that one?
So, I really would encourage someone, think about trafficking in the way that we think about domestic violence. How would you interact and communicate with someone whose partner may be violent, erratic, or in some way dangerous? What would you do? Just to personalize that a bit more. That said, I am always a fan of having our wallet cards on hand, just to very discreetly slip a victim that information. It's always okay to ask them, questions when you don't think that a trafficker is listening, because you don't also know if the girl sitting next to her actually works for him and is, one of his watchers, shall we say. So you always want to be careful and not overload. If you feel safe and that potential victim feels safe, there may be ways to communicate more freely. But I would also just say, trust your gut, trust your instincts, and really rely on your ability to stay safe, get as much information as you can, but realize that that's what law enforcement and other people are there for too. So just starting that open rapport and that trust is huge.
Yeah, and something that I've heard Liz talk about in different contexts too, of never underestimate the importance of simple acts of kindness and pausing to make sure that a victim or a potential victim or someone that you're concerned about feels seen, feels recognized, and feels acknowledged as a human being with real dignity and importance. And that even in those moments, if you aren't sure what you're looking at, or aren't really sure kind of how to engage in kind of specific questions connected to trafficking, that just those acts of kindness can go so far and can potentially open someone up to seeking assistance at a later time. But also just as a reminder that the National Human Trafficking Hotline, that number is 888-373-7888. It's a number that anyone in the United States can call to anonymously, confidentially, report a tip, help access victim services. Sometimes you may have to wait on hold for a little bit, but you will eventually get a person, and you can talk to them about what your suspicions are, what's going on in that moment, and they can kind of help advise you in the immediate situation, kind of what your next steps can and should be.
We have a quick follow-up to that question. Is it okay to be wrong?
Absolutely. I would rather you be wrong. I mean, honestly, I would rather you be wrong. But if you're right, you just changed a life, just even through the kindness of seeing someone and she only orders water because that's all she has. She can't spend the money that she earned. Instead saying, hey, have you eaten today? And finding a way to get her a peanut butter and jelly sandwich could be huge, because you don't know the last time she ate. You don't know the last time that she had someone look at her and not look through her.
Thank you. Okay, we've gotten a couple related questions that I'll kind of combine. Do you have any boilerplate language for internal anti-trafficking policies? And is there a template or guidelines for policies addressing human trafficking?
Yeah, we have on the boilerplate language, so there's kind of two different policies that I'll mention here. One is the anti-trafficking in persons policy with a demand reduction focus. And this would be a policy that it would be a declaration from management that there is a zero tolerance policy for employees to be purchasing sex on work time or with work equipment. It could also be extended to also say that there's a zero tolerance policy for anyone who has engaged in the facilitation of, say, setting up girls on dates with men who are going to be paying to have sex with them. I mean, so there's also kind of that piece of it as well. But we do have standard language for the anti-trafficking in persons policy, and we have guidance for the components that an internal reporting policy should include. So that's the second type of policy that we recommend, and that's one that is intended to make sure that employees, those frontline staff who may be interacting with, potential trafficking situations or interacting with potential trafficking victims, they know what management expects of them when they are suspecting trafficking taking place. And so, these would outline, when you call 911, when you'd call the human trafficking hotline, expectations are for reporting back to management of any times those concerns took place. In a casino context, I mean, this also could be, what are situations that give rise to you freezing security footage that may have been taken? Because there may be things that footage could be corroborating evidence for an investigation, could actually kind of assist in making sure that the investigation is more victim-centered. These are all pieces that you can kind of put in place, and the toolkit has some of those recommendations, which again is available for free on our website.
Great. Another one that I'm sure I know the answer to here, but I'll direct this one probably to Annie. The participant says, thank you for this information. Is there any training for drivers in particular?
For drivers, yes. Our core trainings have been for drivers. So, so TAT was originally, founded in 2009 to work with the trucking industry. And our original, training materials are a 30-minute video training for the trucking industry. In 2018, we launched our Busing on the Lookout training program and developed a specific training tool for the bus industry. We also have a specific training video that is for kind of oil, gas, the energy industry as well. So again, those are all available for free on our website, and we can email you downloadable files or email you DVDs if you want to hand those out. I will also note that for any of you who work with schools or school districts, that in early 2021, we're going to be rolling out a new training specific for school bus drivers. So we're really excited about that. And also, for any of you who are connected to your transit agencies, your kind of community transportation providers, the busing on the lookout training has been utilized by many kind of rural and tribal transit systems through the National Rural Transit Assistance Program. And so those can be accessed via their LMS system, or again, you can contact me and I can send you those resources directly.
Great. Next is sort of half a comment, very thoughtful, and a question. What are your thoughts on utilizing casino surveillance systems to monitor for suspicious activities, such as large numbers of various guests entering and exiting a specific hotel room, especially for extended stays? We in security have a close relationship with our surveillance department, who can do things by monitoring people without being aware. And he adds that may be informative for people if they haven't thought of that. So would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, it's sort of kind of repeating a little bit of what I had said before of the value of that footage in being corroborating evidence, or in helping to make connections of what might have been a suspicion on, say, one day in one part of the casino, but actually you're seeing that over a period of time, that same individual or group of individuals was, engaged in other activities. We've also heard from prosecutors and others that have been involved in investigations that too often some of these cases break down because of victims either not wanting to participate, being afraid of participating, or for whatever reason not being kind of reliable witnesses, or that their testimony can be kind of discredited too easily. And so having that additional evidence, whether it's security footage or other ledgers, or just really kind of concrete, kind of objective evidence, can do a lot to make sure that the investigation isn't totally dependent on a victim's testimony. It can be very traumatizing for a victim to kind of have to relay again what those experiences have been. And so a victim-centered testimony really can rely on other pieces of evidence that some of the security footage can just be kind of game-changing for.
Great. Another participant asked, do you know where a business could get any awareness cards or flyers with the information printed on them so we could put them into new hire orientation packets? That sounds like a great idea to me, to put those there. I think Annie and Liz, you've pardon me here, I'm losing my headphones. I think you've mentioned that you have those available on your website, so we'll be providing a link to those that they can print out.
Yeah, and and even what we would recommend is the incorporating the video training as part of orientation or other ongoing training. I mean, at a minimum, it's got this casino wallet card, it's got the number to the hotline on the front, and then just some basic information about human trafficking, questions to ask, red flags, things to look for. If at a minimum you just include this in your orientation packets, or hand this out to all of your staff, then they'll at least have the basic information. And I think the message too that's relayed by management handing that out is management saying, this is important to us and we support you in reporting suspicions that you may be seeing on our property, because we want to make sure that trafficking isn't taking place here and that we're doing right by victims.
Great point. As well as those resources, I know that for our past trainings, when we were in person, we had ordered some materials from Department of Homeland Security's Blue Campaign, and we were giving those out. Those are also available for free. If you Google, that's another option. All right, next question. Are you aware of any state or federal legislation that has been effective at requiring training for new casinos?
For casinos, I'm not aware of anything that has required it. Generally speaking, at TAT, we advocate for creating incentives or helping to facilitate industry engagement, and there are a lot of steps that can be done at a state and federal level to do that. but not as much in terms of kind of mandating those types of trainings. I'm not aware of anything on casinos that specifically require it at a federal level.
Yeah, nor am I. I mean, I will add that the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act requires public health and safety considerations, and that's something that the NIGC would enforce if that, if it rose to that level. I don't think we've, gotten to the specificity of requiring trainings on this particular topic, and I don't anticipate that that's something we're going to require. But if you're looking kind of for support, generally, what can we look to? I think you can point to IGRA has public health and safety mandates. That's something. If you're looking for your team, say why must we do this? I think that's a good resource for that. If I'm correctly interpreting your question there. Okay. Do you have any suggestions for what to look for in the parking lot or at a gas station or a convenience store? That's also run by the Tribe and Tribal Casino.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, on kind of similarly, look for, signs of control, look for someone who seems to be kind of acting under the direction or the control of another person, lack of eye contact, bruising, branding, physical trauma, someone who seems kind of fearful or uncomfortable with the person that they're with, specifically at gas stations or at truck stops, pay attention to, if there's kind of suspicious, RVs or other vehicles that are parked there, particularly if people are kind of coming in and out of it, that it seems to be just a little bit off. Pay attention to if there is a group of, oftentimes it'll be kind of girls or young women who are kind of hanging out, on the lot, in the truck stop context, like we talk about, if they're, approaching vehicles, but seem to be doing it again under the instruction or direction or control of someone else who seems to be on the premises. Those are all things really to take note of, and call the hotline if there are suspicions. Liz, are there other kind of notes on that you want to jump in on?
I think this would be a great opportunity, particularly for any bathroom, because that may be the only time a victim is allowed alone. Have the posters in there with resources. If I was in a bathroom alone, I would have read it. I would have wanted help. I would also say, have a plan in place if that victim does read it and maybe they're bold enough to come up to you and say, I need help. Make sure that you're preparing yourself for that scenario, because it will happen, and just get comfortable with it. I think the other thing I would say is make sure that you're also aware, particularly for my situation, I would come in one outfit, go into a restroom. I would literally trash all of my clothes in the trash can. And I know the cleaning people probably saw it. So just odd where if I walk in a purple shirt and I end up in a blue shirt, just be aware. That's just weird.
Yeah, and in circumstances where, because we've certainly heard these examples, at gas stations or truck stops or other locations where victims have approached, say the cashier or someone at that location and indicated that like they're under the control of someone else, or that this guy they're with is trying to like force them to prostitute themselves, or some of these other things. Like, also be aware that the likelihood of them saying I'm a victim of human trafficking is almost zero. So by you being aware of kind of what human trafficking is, what are some of those indicators, that if someone is actually asking you for help, that you'll be able to connect the dots to what they might be saying is going on.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. This has gone by so quickly. Would you expect a quick response from the police when 911 is called, or is this something that they gather lots of information before action?
I think it all depends on what's being reported. I mean, if you're making a call and you're really indicating that there's someone who is in immediate danger, you're reporting that you suspect that human trafficking is taking place, and you've observed XYZ kind of whatever the details are, then the response might be very quick. If you're calling the hotline and reporting kind of some suspicions, but you're not sure, and those people are no longer on the premises, that might be folded into an investigation, or might be noted for future reference. It really depends on what's being reported.
Okay, great. I know we're at the hour now, so I would like to offer the floor to Annie and Liz for any final thoughts before we let our participants go.
Just again, thank you to Catherine, to the National Indian Gaming Commission, and to all of you for joining us today. Thank you for your questions, for your interest, and I really hope that this is the beginning of a conversation and the beginning of opportunities to collaborate. So whether it's through incorporating our training materials or talking about hosting coalition builds in the future, I really hope this is the first opportunity that we're having to talk about this, and not the last. So please, you see my contact information is still up on the screen. Reach out, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Great. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Liz. I was just,
That's okay.
just going to say, Liz.
It's all good. No, and thank you just for wanting to make a difference. I think that's the biggest thing that you need. You need to have that passion and fire in your belly that I know all of you are feeling from this training, and then transform that into action. Don't let this just be another webinar. Instead, make a solid plan right after this of how am I going to implement this? Don't let it, because I know that there's a victim that's waiting for someone to see them. So let this be the moment that they're seen.
Thank you so much. I think this has been incredibly powerful for our participants. I'm seeing a lot of thank you comments coming up in the chat box. Someone saying we will be implementing awareness of this topic in our surveillance training. So, we're already seeing progress. I just really want to thank both of you and Truckers Against Trafficking for, you're providing this for free. We've had this in the works for months, trying to, coordinate a time and, get it together with our participants. So we're just very excited we finally were able to make this happen. And I agree with Annie that I hope it's the start of the conversation. We're going to follow up with all of the materials that were mentioned in an email to all participants. We'll make this recording available too if you have folks on your team who weren't able to join us today, so no one will miss out. I really cannot thank you enough, Annie and Liz, for doing such an incredible job on this presentation. It's been very just inspiring, and it makes me want to think, what else can we do? How can we help more? So thank you for that, and thank you also to all the participants for taking the time, for bringing this leadership to your own communities, and figuring out what you can do at your facilities in your own lives. I think that's what's going to make all the difference. So thank you all, and I think with that we will sign off.
Okay, thank you.